G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic start to the week. Now today, as always, we have a lot to go over. We need to talk about what resulted of the peace summit that took place over the weekend. We need to look at China and what is happening there and what the NATO secretary has said about China. And of course, we'll have a look at the maps. We'll look at some geolocated footage and some other bits and pieces. Now, good news in this video is Suryak, he's back from his break. So we do have updates on his maps in areas as well. Now, as you know, I was traveling interstate yesterday, caught up with a couple of friends who I haven't seen in years, may have had one or two too many beers. So we may take it slower today than usual as well. Now, let's have a look. We'll start with then the map. So of course, here is Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22 and the purple since 2014. So one of my guys who's been on this a little bit and will remain anonymous until at least after the war sent then over this, and this confirms what we've talked about a little bit. Keep an eye on that east-west MSR main service route. If things link in, the road to Basra, road of death. If you're not sure or familiar with the road of death, Basra, this is what took place in Iraq from American forces. I'll show some photographs. If not, fuck, that shit's going to get bad quick. Now, this connects Pokrovsk through then basically to Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar area, of course, running through areas like Konstantinivka. Now, let's have a look on this map and it'll also show you where this is. So Pokrovsk, and roughly this is the road here. This is very critical. And what we have said is that Russia are trying to get to this intersection that sits down in here. Of course, then this will have a big problem on this supply route down to the south and supplying areas in New York, Toretsk front. So this road, and like we've spoken about, we spoke last few videos about could this be where the main objective is to get to this intersection here and cut this road off. He agrees with that and has said that it is as important as we have been talking about in here. If you have a look at, there's not that many other routes, and especially as the roads are deteriorating, the weather will deteriorate towards the end of the year. These roads, these routes are going to be more and more important, especially with Russia pushing in Chasiv Yar and pushing out from Avdiivka here as well. Now what we'll do, we'll lift up out of here and we'll have a talk about in the north around this Vovchansk front. One thing I will say, over the past couple of months, as Russia has really taken the initiative, has been on the offensive, they have all their footage on like full lockdown. We're getting very, very few footage or photographs of anywhere on the front line. Not much GoPro, not much drone, not many photos, not really anything. We get the occasional video of a strike, the occasional video from a drone of a flag going up somewhere. But other than that, they really do have it locked down on the ground. Now, Vovchansk front. It's a very interesting area here. Our last video, we spoke about this and the messaging about the cut off of Russian troops in here. And one thing I'll say about Vovchansk, it is difficult to know what the hell is happening in this front line because the messaging around here is the same both ways. So the messaging from both pro-Ukrainian bloggers and pro-Russian bloggers is that their forces are there holding in place because the enemy side keep feeding men into the meat grinder and elements are surrounded from the opposing force. It's both sides are saying this. And as I will say, well, we get that messaging a lot in a lot of areas of Iran. We are holding in place because the enemy keeps sending men in. And that messaging is no different to Bakhmut, to Avdiivka, to other areas we've looked at. And you need to remember that this isn't mutually exclusive either, that both can actually be correct in this. And like we say, with all information down through the propaganda stream, that all good propaganda has an element of truth in it. Is both Ukraine and Russia reinforcing and sending men into these areas? Yes. Are there probably high losses here? Yes, as well. Are there elements that could be disconnected or surrounded or cut off in here? Potentially, yes, as well. Now, originally people were reporting that there was 400 Russians in here. Other pages I'm seeing today are now claiming 50 to 100. Again, we are not sure, but we do have a little bit of footage to show you down in here and some news about the commander that let this then occur. So this is some footage and they'll show you where the geolocation is in the beginning of this. And this is said to be Hammer missiles from Ukrainian fighter aircraft working in this area, dropping bombs in Vovchansk. Now I'll show you on the geolocation of where some of these strikes are taking place. And as you can see, very large strikes here. So I'll show you where those initial strikes were. So it's in the northern sector of Vovchansk. Now, an interesting observation here that I have taken is, of course, in this sector, this is where the US first has lifted restrictions for Ukraine to fire their weapon systems back into Russia. And we have seen some air defense systems taken out in Russian territory here too. And now we're seeing Ukrainian fighter aircraft working at least around this area. Of course, those weapon systems do have a long range, but we haven't really seen that many strikes, at least being reported, going back across soon. And that actually goes into like with ATACMS too. We saw a hell of a lot of ATACMS going in and being fired a few weeks ago, and we're not seeing very many at the moment. Same with Storm Shadow Scalp. We haven't seen much of that recently either. So if we zoom back in on Vovchansk, we have another video here actually showing a Russian soldier then surrendering to Ukrainian forces here. So these are then Ukrainian forces, and this is then the Russian, then they take as a prisoner of war here. Now, you can actually see that this is then geolocated to here on the east of Vovchansk. Now we come back out here and we'll have a look now. There's no changes on this map around Haliboki area, but we then do have this from Noel Reports. He is showing that Ukraine has made ground back into Haliboki itself, as well on the eastern side here as well, at least pushing on this. So we cannot ignore what happened up here and the failures that occurred with the defensive works that allowed Russia to push in here. And there's more videos coming out that Russia is building more defensive works with excavating equipment inside Ukrainian territory now in these areas of which they occupy, which creates a problem because you're going up now against a hardened defensive works. And we do know this has had a huge morale effect on other areas on the front line, and a lot of soldiers feeling like they've been stabbed in the back because of here. All the guys I talk to point exactly to here of having a morale effect on guys on other areas of the front line. Now, this has come out then today through Ukrainian media. The commander of the 125th Brigade, which allowed Russian breakthrough in Kharkiv Oblast, resigns from office. This Lieutenant General, commander of the 125th, has announced his resignation, but he has stressed that he will continue his service in the armed forces of Ukraine. As part of his criminal proceedings, Ukraine State Bureau of Investigation is studying the circumstances of the border breakthrough by Russian forces in the Kharkiv Oblast. That and other units failed to properly organize the defense positions on the border of Kharkiv Oblast and the Russian Federation, leading to the loss of positions and military equipment and personnel. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what happens with these proceedings here and what is happening to people that directly were involved in the failure of the defensive works for this, but I hope that people are held to account and responsible for what was allowed to take place on this front. Now, we have a couple of videos here. Now, I don't have any geolocations to this, but we do see one of the Blyatmobiles has actually been captured along with the crew then inside of it by Ukrainian forces. And then you can see then being driven back out. This reminds me of the German tank, which was stolen by the Australians as well. We have then a photograph of this, people call them garage tank, Blyatmobile, turtle tank, whatever you want to call it, then here as well. It'd be interesting to know what sort of electronic warfare was taking place under that shroud that we see as well. That shroud does also negate Ukraine's autonomous targeting. So if it's looking for a tank and that bloody house thing's on top of it, the AI, the autonomous targeting may not or won't pick up and then target that unless it's been specifically programmed for this. Now, what we need to do is we've missed 2 days. So we need to roll back just 1 day on this map. And the biggest update from yesterday, or the only update on this map, was then this. What this is a Ukrainian advancement into the Kremenar Forest, said to be by the 12th Brigade as of. Now, we have a few maps showing this. So this is the Noel Reports Ukrainian map as well. And he's showing just to the south here that they also made ground. You can see where the defensive works are. This isn't being represented on a Syriac map, nor do we have a geolocation of this, but the Ukrainian maps here, both of them are showing a movement in this area. And I have seen some chatter about some movement there as well. So that was the only map update yesterday that then we missed. Of course, this is in blue because it's newer than 2 weeks. Now we'll come to today's map. There's nothing along the north here. What we then see on today's map is Russia continue this expansion of control out from Avdiivka, from Umansk, Osheretny, Kedemik areas on 3 different axes here, making ground. Of course, expanding this, but also that shortens then the front line. And the risk now of the cutoff here, when people were saying that was what's going to happen, has limited as well. And like I spoke about in the beginning of this, that eventually may put pressure on this main service route, this main road running through to then Konstantinivka. Now, Surak doesn't have any map updates in here. I hope he will review over areas of the last week as well, like he has done for some other front lines. So let's go and we'll have a look at one more change that is being shown by Noel reports in Rozdilivka here. So this sits just to the south of Seversk and to the north of Bakhmut. So let's have a look right here. That Noel reports Ukrainian sources map is showing then along the railway and this road here into Rozdilivka on two separate fronts. It's basically lining up exactly with the grey zone on the deep state map itself. So that will be an interesting area to continue looking as well. Now, where I want to go straight away, and we'll come back to this front, but it actually is down into the south, into the Kherson front. Now, what we do know is we had footage about a week and a half ago of Russian paratroopers right in here in this green zone getting hit by drones. And we did have reports that Ukraine had pulled back to the right side of the Dnieper. It had pulled out of some areas around Krinky, Kozachiliri, but this was just reports. We had flags, both Ukrainian and Russian, and then Ukrainian ones getting pulled down and Russian ones getting pulled down. It's hard to know what is actually happening on this left bank. But let's look at claims then made by Suryak maps. Now, what he shows, of course, this is this crossing from Oleshki and as well down in the west of this front and to the east. And of course, this is this Krinky, Kozachiliri, then bridgehead that was made. Situation Kherson front. On June 5th, the Russian army succeeded in recapturing a large part of Dachi by reaching the left bank of the Dnieper on this axis. Russian troops continued to clear the Delta Islands southwards and Oblast capital, taking up some positions in this island. So we're talking down in this region here. In particular, the island of this remains in grey zone despite the fact both sides claim control over it. On the other hand, localities of Kozachiliri, Krinky returned to full Russian control. It seems the Ukrainian army took some snapshots in the first locality before evacuating the southern shore towards the islands, which still have a Ukrainian presence. So there are still Ukrainian elements operating in the islands, of course, in the Dnieper, but at least Suryak himself is claiming there's been a withdrawal from some of these bridgeheads here that are shown in grey on this map. So that is interesting to know. We're not really sure how this would look in a larger operation to actually try and get armor and assets across onto then the left bank if Ukraine was to try an offensive down in then the south. Now let's come just to the east of here and Robotny front. Now, no change, of course, on this map. There's been no change for a while, but let's have a look at then what Suryak map is showing in here. Now, of course, he shows significantly different around Robotny itself. If we look where this road turns out, this is that turnout. But he is showing as well, out from Novopokrovka, there has been a Russian advancement here as well. That said, it's not shown across multiple maps. Let's continue then moving to the east, and we have the Uruzhany Starmorsky front, where we do know over the last week, this map has showed a lot of Russian advancement here. And then Suryak shows for the 7th of June through to the 12th of June, then the movements that have been made by the Russian forces. And now these maps are actually showing very, very similar to each other. Although in Uruzhany does show very different. But Starmorsky shows the same. Uruzhany is showing different. We see where then this river runs up, that this is showing somewhat different, but it is interesting to see where different front lines are changing. Now, we'll just move to the east a little bit more. We see this green just out from Ugledar. Then it is shown on this map here. Suryak is showing that Ukraine had some advancement just to the north of Mikilsky. And we'll just continue on this, and then we'll move into the east. Paraskovsky, Novomyalivka front here. Bring back up this map, and Suryak is showing a further advancement on the 7th of June. So a week ago through Paraskovsky, we can line up where then the reservoir is sitting, that they're showing the Russian forces have moved further into Paraskovsky here as well. Now we'll continue our northern push, and then we'll come to Mariinka, Herovka front here as well. Of course, Suryak has an update here. Now, a good way to line this up is have a look at this like triangular paddock here where the grey zone is sitting, and Suryak is showing that it is red zone to the westernmost part of then this triangular paddock. So he's showing that it's red all the way up through here. And of course, this puts pressure down to the south and the north if Russia was able to push up into some of these urban centers as well, potentially enveloping other front lines. Now, Krasnohorivka, we know there was a lot of changes in here, and then it really did slow down into that urban battle, which is normal. People say, oh, look, it's slowed down. Yes, as you enter urban areas, regardless who's doing it, it's going to slow down a lot. Now, we can just compare these maps and where different elements are pushing. Now, Ukraine still show a lot of grey zone down into here, where we did see some of those Bradleys go. We did see some of them destroyed as well. 10th of June, out from these dashes here, it's showing a lot more control just to the south of Krasnohorivka, as well as a similar amount of control into the north of Krasnohorivka. But you can see that the latest update here was the 16th of June. Now, that'll be the end of our maps, but I want to talk about the peace summit over the weekend. Long awaited, many countries went, and what then came out of it. Of course, we know Russia and China were not attending, so let's have a look. So during the summit, the countries considered 3 issues that were included in the communique as an urgent resolution. The use of energy and nuclear facilities must be safe and environmentally sound. Ukraine's nuclear power plants facility, computing the ZNPP, must operate safely under Ukraine's sovereign control. So, of course, on the maps, that is across from Nikopol here in Enerhodar. This is the nuclear power plant here. We do know IAEA inspectors are allowed into here as well and are keeping an eye on the situation. But they're saying it needs to be under Ukraine's sovereign control. Number 2 is global food security. Number 3, all prisoners of war must be released in full exchange. All deported and illegally displaced Ukrainian children, as well as other illegally detained civilians, must be returned to Ukraine. So those are the 3 things that came out of this communique, and we do know as well that they are also 3 of the points within Ukraine's 10-point peace plan as well. We need to look at who signed this, but more interestingly, we need to look at what countries then refused to sign this and back this too. Now, who signed the joint communique on Ukraine? Now, this from Reuters is saying 82 delegations signed to support the communique. That said, some are quoting different numbers. I've seen 76, I've seen 82, but let's just say it's floating around 80. Now, what we need to say is there was about 100 delegations went to then this conference out of the 160 that were invited. Which countries did not sign? Now, this is the interesting part. India, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, Indonesia, and the UAE. We'll talk about why they didn't sign this. They're represented by foreign minister and envoys, but they were among those who did not sign the joint communique. Brazil attended Ukraine summit as an observer, but did not back the communique. Russia was not invited to the summit. Moscow dismissed as futile. China also did not attend the 2-day event. Pakistan, which counts China as its closest ally, was invited but chose not to attend. Now, you can see there are some very powerful and influential countries, both economically and militarily, sitting in these that did not sign. We'll show you a map and you get a better idea of what's going on. Why did they not sign? We see India, India believes that peace in Ukraine requires bringing together all stakeholders and a sincere and practical engagement between 2 parties to the conflict. Now, of course, Russia was not invited, and this conference was never to have peace at the end of it. It was never going to be the conference and then the guns fall silent. Saudi Arabia have encouraged steps towards serious negotiations, which will require difficult compromises as part of a roadmap that leads to peace. And here it is essential to emphasize that any credible process will need Russia's participation. South Africa's reasons for not backing the communique were different. The country's national security advisor wrote in a statement, "It is surprising that at this conference, Israel is present and participating, 5 days after the UN-backed commission accused Israel of committing war crimes against Palestinians. Questioned the legitimacy of the communique, and its sponsors argued was driven for respect for international law when Israel has been accused by UN officials of violating international law. Of course, South Africa has accused Israel of genocide in Gaza." So let's have a look at this map of which countries did sign and which ones didn't. And as you can see through Asia as well, the amount of countries in here that some were not represented and then refused to sign as well. I think this gives a better picture to the outcome of then the peace conference. So let's talk then about China. We know China is very, very influential around the world. They're also influential in Russia and could be incredibly influential in this war and which way it goes. One, could they have pull on Russia to have some sort of compromise deal, withdrawal, whatever, but on the other hand, have a massive industrial base that could affect and prolong the war on Russia's side. Now, the head of NATO, of course, Jens Stoltenberg, has told the BBC that China should face consequences for supporting Russia's war in Ukraine if it does not change its ways. Jens Stoltenberg said Beijing was trying to get it both ways by supporting Russia's war effort while also trying to maintain relationships with European allies. This cannot work in the long run. As we know, China also have a lot to benefit from this war. And one thing that became very clear talking with some guys yesterday is the sanctions against Russia is one thing. And the effect that we see in the West from those sanctions isn't that great. If you had the then equivalent sanctions placed on China, the effect felt in the West, particularly countries like Australia, would be massive. But there's actually some sanctions against products in China that are having then an effect actually into Ukraine. So some of the embargoes are sanctions on some of these dual-use products, items around drones and little bits and pieces like this. Well, okay, those bits and pieces are being used in drones for the Russian forces, but where do you think all the parts for FPV drones and DJIs and all of this is coming from that are fighting in Ukraine as well? He said China was sharing a lot of technologies like microelectronics, which are key for Russia to build missiles, weapons they use against Ukraine. He added, at some stage, we should consider some kind of economic cost if China doesn't change their behavior, saying it's not selling lethal arms and prudently handles the export of dual-use items in accordance with laws and regulations. So there's a lot of speculation about how much China is actually supporting actively Russia's war. We know Russia is buying some products to use from China. These aren't products like tanks or fighter jets or missiles. Could that occur in the future? Potentially. Could China then support more? There's been a lot of speculation about how much ISR assets that China has been giving to Russia from things like satellites. And heading into more of a multipolar world, these sanctions won't have as much of an effect that they may have had 10 or 20 years ago. And of course, the sanction here will be felt the ripples out through the world as well. So this will be very interesting to see what happens here, especially with China potentially looking at Taiwan elections at the end of the year. It's all something we'll put a pin in, and we will, I'm sure, come back to it at some point. Legends, there's probably lots of cuts in this video. My brain is mush. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.